Hello everybody. First, allow me to introduce our panel. Adam Fine, U.S. Business Development Manager with Blue White Robotics. Mr. Craig Ledbetter, he is on the AgSafe Board of Directors, among many boards. And he's also the Vice President Partner at Vino Farms. And Mr. Michael Miller, he's the Director of Government Relations with the California Association of Wine and Grape Growers. My name is Jeff Jurgens. I am with the Association of Equipment Manufacturers. I'm the Director of Product Stewardship. So today, this group is here to answer the question, do autonomous machines still have a future in California farms? And if we do this right, you should leave this with a resounding yes. Yes, they do. As agricultural use of autonomous equipment, it mitigates worker exposure to hazards. And at the end of the panel, if your answer isn't yes, please ask questions. Please come talk to these gentlemen so we can clarify any misconceptions that you may have. So before we get to the panel and ask questions, we thought it might be good if I laid a little bit of groundwork and set the stage, so to speak. So those of you that have been here all week, after I listened to Martha Sanchez, and you'll have to forgive me because I did some research last night. I want to make sure that I had these figures square. So after Martha Sanchez from DPR and Derek Engard from OSHA spoke, I did some research last night, and according to the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, or NIOSH, as you may know them, among the estimated 2 million agricultural workers in the United States, physicians diagnose 20,000 pesticide poisonings each year. Those aren't exposures, those are poisonings, right? Autonomous driverless sprayers eliminate any incidents where employees are exposed to those pesticides during application. See and spray technology all but eliminates the drift that Martha was speaking about yesterday. See and spray technology, if you don't know it, they use multispectral cameras. As they're driving through, those cameras pick out the weeds, and they hit those weeds directly. So it's just a little squirt instead of a big broadcast. And when you get that all it eliminates drift. Farm workers, such as yourselves, are 35 times more likely to die from heat-related illnesses than workers in general, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So already, 21 days per season, U.S. crop-growing counties are considered unsafe because of heat. Autonomous machines can prevent workers being exposed to those heat-type situations. You're at the keynote address. Eric Bailey spoke about the millions of inputs that we receive per second, right, with our eyes and with our hands. But we can only, as humans, we can only process a few thousand of those, which results in operators making assumptions based on perceptions, as he said. The undistracted nature of autonomous 360-degree cameras, the array of onboard sensors, and the high-speed processors provide an excellent level of detectability for monitoring the environment and preventing incidents. In the U.S., tractor accidents are the leading cause of farming fatalities and serious injury, according to the National Agricultural Safety Database. That initiative reports that 130 agricultural equipment-related deaths occur annually. That's 50% of all farm worker deaths resulting each year. And from 2007, that totals 1,820 deaths. Farming is the second most dangerous industry behind mining. And as I'll get down further below, we'll address how mining is dealing with these issues. So that was hazard data. Now I'm going to walk you through how autonomous machinery addresses those hazards. Due to the emerging nature of the equipment and current California regulations, unfortunately, there's not an excessive data on safe usage of autonomous equipment. There is some. So through their seeding, spraying, and spreading operations, Raven Technology has accumulated over 8,000 safe use hours of operational time, covering 69,000 acres with 18 machines. That's a lot of safe use data. Blue White Robotics, represented here by Adam, have over 10,000 hours of safe use operation. But we can draw from other industries to illustrate this safety of autonomous equipment. So I'm going to take it on a little path, just bear with me, and then we'll bring this back. The first autonomous haul trucks began testing in Japan in 1990. The The first commercial deployment was in Chile in 2007. So we used quick math. 33 years ago, autonomous machinery started testing. After that testing began, it was 17 years before the first deployment. So 17 years of threat assessment and remediation analysis took place before the first machines were even deployed. We wanted to make sure these were safe. You don't want to put these in the field and have autonomous machinery get a bad name, right? But just 1 year later, in 2008, another system was launched in Australia because of the success of the first. Jump forward 10 years. By 2018, Komatsu had moved over if you guys got paper and pencils, you might want to write some of these stats down. They're pretty staggering. Komatsu had moved over 2 billion tons of material with 130 autonomous mining trucks. As of June 2020, just 2 years later, those numbers jumped to 3 billion tons, moved by 251 trucks. So it took 10 years for them to move 2 billion tons. 2 years later, they moved another billion tons, and the number of trucks deployed was doubled. Again, that shows that success. Once people try this out and get confidence in it, they understand the rewards that brings. The last report from Komatsu Mining, they have now hauled more than 4 billion metric tons of material. So for 2020, just to now, another billion tons of material. They've hauled at over 84 million miles with over 400 trucks. That is quite a safe use data set. Now, with 16 years of commercial operation, 0 system-related injuries have been reported. So 33 years of autonomous testing, not a single incident, where we've killed 1,800 people since this began. With more than 560 trucks currently in operation, Caterpillar trucks have traveled more than 116 million miles and autonomously moved over 5.5 billion tons of material, all without a single lost time injury. So in case you missed those numbers, Caterpillar Crosser trucks have hauled 200 million miles without an incident. So I'm going to recap this with just a little bit of fuzzy math. The largest mining trucks built today haul 400 tons, all right? There have been 9.5 billion tons of material hauled. So that means 1,000 mining trucks have made a minimum of 47,500,000 trips without a single incident. That's a pretty astonishing data set. It's pretty tough to say that we're not real sure if autonomous equipment is safe or not. So employees deployed at these work sites operate in cooperation with these autonomous machines, resulting in a demonstratively safer environment that reduces worker exposure to hazards. Not taking their jobs, it's saving them. It's making them safer, making sure that they go home healthy at night. So we agree with all stakeholders, including organized labor, that ag worker safety is paramount above all. And the methods of controlling exposures to hazards in the workplace and protecting workers is the elimination of the hazard. That is the most expected, not PPE, not orange vest, but eliminating them from the hazards. So, 33 years of data irrefutably answer the question, do autonomous machines have a future in California farms? And the answer is yes, a resounding yes. So now to these gentlemen here. Mike, there have been some developments in an effort to change Title VIII and include self-propelled ag equipment. What's been happening since June of 2022?
A lot, actually. So it's important to look at basically where we've been. So if you look back to, I believe it was 2019 was an original petition to the Occupational Safety Health Standards Board to try to amend the regulation in a way that reflected the technology that we have today. That regulation was unanimously defeated, 7-0 vote defeating it. Then there was another petition filed to amend the same regulation. I believe that was 2021, 22. That regulation was not quite as soundly defeated, only died by a 4-3 vote. Importantly, where 3 votes had moved in that period was that they recognized that something needed to be done. There's a basic, I think, groundswell building around the idea that this is a 50-year-old regulation based on 80-year-old technology. It's not where things are today, it's not where the technology is today. and it needs to be amended. I think that's a general belief that most people will agree with. And when you really look at the objections to fixing the regulation, they're more political in nature and not as much based on policy and what is the public good purpose of the regulation. So there's a lot of interest in the new administration, a lot of interest in the board members, and there's a lot of education happening. We at CAWG are very interested and invested in the issue for a variety of reasons. We think precision viticulture is the future. You know, if you look at how are you going to grow grapes in California and comply with our strict regulatory laws and comply with our strict environmental regulations as well as labor regulations, autonomous equipment, robotics, that kind of thing has to be part of the conversation because it makes it easier and more affordable to comply with the regulation. So we want to move forward with fixing that regulation. In our conversations with stakeholders, manufacturing, with agriculture, everybody agrees with us, and there's a groundswell happening around it. I've been in 5 of these presentations over the last 3 weeks, talking with people, getting their feedback on it, sharing what they have in Sacramento, and there's enthusiasm building around the issue. The Occupational Safety and Health Standards Board is going to be taking up this issue as a panel discussion at its March hearing, where they're going to bring in experts to talk about how does the equipment work, what are the safety parameters, how do we know that employees are safe when they use this equipment, how does it operate, what's the data, you raise a lot of good data points. They want to see all of that. Also, next week down at the World Ag Expo in Tulare, the board members are going to be down there meeting with manufacturers directly, including a bunch of manufacturers here today, talking about the same thing and looking at it from a more machine by machine, manufacturer by manufacturer, application by application basis. How does it work in a vineyard? How does it work with vegetables? How does it work, you know, with one company versus another, and seeing how it all fits together. So there's a lot of interest in Sacramento on the issue, and they know that they have to do something on this regulation, and we're pushing for it. And I think that the reception today is very different than it was even 3 years ago. They recognize that something has to be done. If you think about California, you know, we're 2 industries that most people around the world will look at California and think about. They think about agriculture, you know, we feed the world, and they think about technology. We look at robotics in the vineyard or in agriculture, as well as autonomous equipment. This is where the 2 don't come together in California. Nowhere else in the country do we have the strict regulatory requirements that we have right here in the home of manufacturing, technology, innovation, and agriculture. So there's a lot of interest in how we fix this and how we deal with it.
Craig, I think this is probably aimed at you. Machine learning is playing an ever-increasing role in automation and autonomy. With regards to the above statistics, are there additional steps the ag equipment industry needs to take to adequately evaluate risks and hazards associated with this technology?
Well, I think everyone in this room is more than smart enough to understand that if there is nobody operating a tractor and it were to wreck or crash or run into grapevines or run into whatever it is, go into a ditch, that it's impossible for somebody to be hurt if they're not on it. So, you know, when you talk about the safety of employees, and you know, in my family's business, we have this discussion, and things are so different than they used to be. When my dad and my uncle were running the business in the 70s and the 80s and into the 90s, things were different. You know, there was direction. You were given direction to go do your job, and you did your job. Today, you know, we as business owners and supervisors and managers, production and safety are 50-50. There is no difference. If your employee doesn't get to go home at night to see his family, No one's interested in that. Absolutely no one. There's not an employer on earth that would say, I'm okay with that. You know, so when we talk about autonomous tractors and where we think this can go, you heard the statistics. It's by far the safest direction that we could possibly go. You know, my only thing is, how can we get there quicker? You know, can we get there quicker? And unfortunately, we have to prove ourselves to the regulators that are out there that this is safe. Now, jobs. Jobs are important. You want me to go into that, or do you want?
No, you're leading right into the next question. How is autonomous equipment going to change how you run your operation?
So jobs. All of us here work in the agricultural world. We all have more jobs than we have people to do. It's plain and simple. Especially now that we have the wonderful Lorena Gonzalez work week of 8 hours a day, 5 days a week versus 6 10s. And as our margins get cut and cut and cut and cut even more, we can't afford to pay that overtime. It's just not feasible to go along with all the new regulations that employers are forced to pay now that they didn't pay before. So jobs are extremely important. I don't have enough tractor drivers to drive tractors. We use the H2A program to bring in tractor drivers, so we have them. It works, but we have housing. If you don't have your housing, it's not something that works very well for any employer. So there is no better person to operate an autonomous tractor via an iPad, via a computer, than a tractor operator himself or herself. Like, there isn't. They're going to have a better understanding if something's not operating correctly because they're paying attention. If they're paying attention to multiple tractors, 4, 5, 6, whatever it may be, and they're going to pick up something better than me hiring some IT person right out of college who's never been around a tractor ever in their life and wouldn't know what to do if it were to have an issue. So, when you talk about jobs, that's one of the things that I think our regulators fear because of our government and how much involved unions are in our day-to-day life and how much they want to get involved in all of our businesses. That's their thing, and that's what they're forcing on these regulators and advisors that we're hearing is that you're taking jobs from somebody. I'm like, how can I take a job from somebody if I don't even have somebody to be in the seat? Number one. So we have this new work week, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. I now have 1, 2, 3, 4 of these individuals now that are operating tractors. Maybe I don't need to bring in H2A workers into the United States of America because I do have enough people to operate these tractors that are already here, domestic workers that have been tractor drivers for us for years. Give them the proper training. You know what? Now all of a sudden, because they do want it, they want that overtime, they want to work. You guys all know it. All of our employees are not they're not making as much money as they were before minimum wage went up and hours went down. They're making less. There's less to take home to their family. We can get back into a situation where that overtime actually can be feasible and paid because of how much more efficient we are. And I didn't get into the efficiencies of autonomous equipment. I mean, the distractions, what's a tractor driver thinking when he's driving tractor? I've driven tractor. I've been that person. Where you're not thinking about what you're doing. You're sitting on a tractor. You might be thinking about it when you come to the end of the row because you got to turn around. But when you're in the middle of that row, you're wandering. And the next thing you know, when you're wandering, you have an accident. Or whether you have an accident or not, you're not doing the job the way you should do. So, there's all of those things go hand in hand with this. And we as a vineyard operation company, we are trying to figure out how to stay in business. And we're one of the largest grape growers in the state of California. And if I'm having this conversation with my family and with my head people, how are we going to continue to do this? I don't even want to think about what the small growers is going through. So that's my answer for now.
And I think that's actually supported by the data, what you said about the jobs. I actually looked this up because I found it confusing that they would say this, and I was hearing the exact opposite from our clients. So this is California data from the EDD website. There's 30,000 tractor drivers needed in California, and there is only 15,000 filled. So we've got 50% of the drivers we need. So this idea of taking away jobs just simply doesn't hold water.
No, not at all. I mean, we as a company alone, we are bringing in upwards of 45 tractor drivers a year for 9 to 10 months. So we can get butts and seats throughout the North Coast and through the Lodi Delta area. You know, and you think of those regions, those are easy places to potentially find labor, especially in the North Coast, because you can pay. It's not there. It's just not there. Our average age of field worker / tractor driver in our industry is 45.4 years old. We're less than a generation and a half away, and there's no new young people coming in to fill those seats behind them. In our country now, you are supposed to go to college. When you go to college, you don't graduate from college saying, "Oh, I want to drive a tractor." No, you graduate from college saying, "I want that position, that position, that position, and that position." Well, those positions can't be paid for in agriculture if there isn't someone to drive the tractor. We're only as good as our lowest employee, you know, at any level. So that's what we have to deal with.
I'll just share this too. I have to piggyback what you said about distractions. When I was 14 years old, my uncle had a farm in Mitchell, South Dakota, and I would work summers at his farm, and he put me on the tractor, pulling who knows what behind me. I can't remember, 50 years ago. Weighed a ton. My biggest thrill in pulling that thing back and forth across the field was popping a wheelie. That's all I wanted to do all day long, just a pop a damn wheelie. Big and distracted, yeah.
Efficiency of equipment and how it's operated, and then I didn't even touch on this. The mechanical side of it. You're not gonna, the maintenance side of it. The amount of maintenance required on autonomous tractor is minimal in amount of maintenance required operating by an operator. We all make mistakes, especially when we're driving tractors and we're distracted. We have, whether it's our phone, whether we're daydreaming. I mean, the one time that I can remember being the most distracted ever, I was running trimmers, and you got blades spinning at 700 RPMs, you know, and I was distracted because one of my best friends had died in a car accident a week earlier, and that's all I could think about. Shouldn't have been operating a tractor, but my dad said, "You're going to work. That's how you're going to clear your head." Okay, well, I ended up leaving because I knew I wasn't good for anybody around, let alone myself. So, you know, that's fun to, you're 18 years old and you just don't, you leave work, you don't tell anybody, and you have to go home and have dinner with your dad. It's awesome. But, you know, those are the things that I think, the maintenance, the efficiencies, and the safety. I mean, they're there. The technology's there. We want everyone to go to college these days. There's gotta be jobs for them to have. Agricultural technology could be the fastest growing industry the fastest part of our industry. It could be the fastest growing part of our industry. All we need is some regulation to say we can go ahead and start doing it.
Agree with that. Adam, you mentioned some labor statistics, and so I wanted to hit on. So it's predicted with current methods of farming there will not be enough food to feed the population by 2050. How can autonomous machinery help growers to meet that demand?
So it's funny you asked this question because in our company we go back and forth on this individual talking point. So I think it's important to go to the root of it and where it came from. So the 2050 statistic is from a book called The Population Bomb by a Stanford professor named Paul Ehrlich. And he predicted we're going to run out of food. Paul Ehrlich was wrong, and it's important to understand just how he was wrong and how much he was wrong. The problem is actually now the opposite. And I've used this talking point in my past, so I've used it. I'm as guilty as anyone. What's important to understand is that the developing countries in the world, they're not where the food comes from. They're mass food importers. Developed countries in the world are where we produce food, and that's where the food comes from, we're the exporters. Populations are actually declining in the developed countries, but they're still rising in the undeveloped countries. So what we actually have is a situation where the food producing nations aren't gonna have enough people to produce the food for the nations where the food needs to be consumed. And there's really nothing to pick up that gap other than technology. So agriculture technology kind of is the last thing we have to fix this issue of food insecurity. So that's where I see that having the biggest effect.
And I'll admit, as a farmer, especially if you go back, you know, a generation or two, scared to death of technology, you know? But we're in a day and age today that everyone's got one of these. Everyone's car basically has some type of GPS unit in it now. It's got Sirius satellite radio. I mean, everyone at home uses a computer. I mean, for God's sakes, my 78-year-old dad actually knows how to use an iPad. And it's here. We can't be scared of it. We have to hold on to it. We have to help it evolve, because if we don't, what Adam just said, it is accurate.
Isn't that sort of a false equivalency though? Because those machines don't drive our cars, don't fly our airplanes, and have a potential to
Tesla
create-
can't drive automatically?
Pardon me?
Teslas can't drive automatically down the road?
Well, they're not supposed to
I know,
because of that.
but they can.
But you're right, but you didn't mention Tesla, you were saying your phone, so.
No, I know, I'm just saying the technology in general. The technology's there, we have to start.
Because, you know, and I got a question, I guess, where does this fit into the larger picture as far as labor, economics, and social picture? Because you're talking about third world countries that are booming, but here in the United States, how far are we gonna take technology to the point where, you know, how about the middle class and people that don't want to go to university or college and just want to be in labor? What's the end picture? And I know this we're talking a smaller, you know.
No, it's a good question and perfectly valid. I think we actually have a topic on it coming up. But for ag tech, what's important to understand is technology is a force multiplier. It gives opportunity to people that typically wouldn't have it. So if you look at me, I use technology for everything that I do. The chair, the phone, computers. And I didn't have a career path when I got injured. And now you're looking at someone who's employed who wouldn't be otherwise. I think that this technology can bring so much opportunity to communities that haven't had access to it. So in the Central Valley, there is going to be $60 million deployed into the community for the purpose of commercializing ag tech. And schools are getting involved, community colleges are starting programs, hiring new staff, and it's all for the purpose of basically upscaling jobs in those communities where all that opportunity that happened in Silicon Valley, or that happened in San Francisco with the .com boom. I'm not saying we're gonna have that exact copy paste, but we're gonna have the same type of opportunities where people can have access to skills that are transferable between industries. So if you learn how to drive an autonomous tractor, there's nothing keeping you from driving drones or driving autonomous construction equipment or working in security or mobility. These are really valuable skills that can be ported from one industry to another. So that's how I see it affecting people in the middle class or lower class financial situations who can now access that type of economic opportunity that wouldn't be there. And I think everyone sees that, from academics to economic development organizations to California State, because they wouldn't fund these grants otherwise. And the money's there, it just needs to be distributed, and this regulation needs to change for that to happen.
One consideration too is that technology, innovation, autonomous equipment, robotics, all that, it actually helps make the job easier. It makes it easier for the employee to do the work, right? So the example that I use is, if you look at, when you go to the grocery store, you have the scanner that reads the barcode on your groceries, right? I remember the 70s when that was developed, that I saw a piece of the local news when I was living in Iowa as a kid, where they were focused on, well, the grocery clerks, they're not gonna like that because now they're gonna be replaced by a machine that's reading the barcode instead of them putting in the price of what the product was, piece by piece. Fast forward to today, if you were to go to the United Food Commercial Workers Union, which represents the grocery cashiers, and say, hey, we want to eliminate the barcode and go back to that technology, they would have a fit. They would come unglued. They're like, no. We want that technology because it makes the job easier to do. And that's just the nature of innovation technology, is that when it's easier for people to do their work, they come to embrace it, and they really want it, and become reliant on it, actually.
So I think that's a great segue when you talk about kind of going back. Craig, especially for someone like myself that this is not intimate in farming operations, describe the process and personal equipment that an ag worker must use when they're applying herbicides and pesticides in that process. And then think about how autonomy fits into that specifically, maybe a little bit different than we've spoken about.
Well, I mean, the process, I mean, I need an operator, I need a loader and a mixer. So there's still always gonna be labor there. You're gonna still have to have somebody. So you go autonomous with this weed sprayer and your tractor, okay? It's being pulled autonomously, but I still have the person who's potentially operating 3 or 4 of these, 5 of these, in a pickup or in an office on site with their iPad, with their computer, however it's gonna be operated.
If we can go back, currently, what does that operation take? Like, help them understand that operation like currently as if you didn't place it with autonomous.
So currently I have a tractor driver, and you're gonna have multiple tractor drivers operating multiple units.
And they have to wear what?
And they have all their PPE, I've never even really thought about it in this way, but
So,
yeah. So
yeah,
you're
walk me
talking
through
about
that.
actually a little bit of a cost savings as well, because you're not having to buy as much PPE. You're not having to provide some of the things that you currently have to provide because the tractor's being operated autonomously. But yeah, PPP is required for everybody. We all know that. That's not something that is not known any longer. So, but to go along with that, so you have the tractor driver. You've provided all his PPP. He's gone through pesticide safety training handling. There's been training on that. What to do if this happens, what to do if that happens, where the eye wash machine is that's with the tank that is, now our fill station. So you've gone through all of those things, okay? So, and everything, time is money, all of these things, they end up costing the employer to move forward. So you have your 2 tractor drivers now. You have your weed sprayers, you have your tractor, and depending on how many you actually have deployed in the field, you might also have a filler, someone who's there loading water tanks for you, for them not to have to drive a long distance to get to a fill spot. So you're bringing that close to them. So now I have 3 people working to do the job of what 2 tractor drivers to do. So operation, you take it autonomously. You're training, you're still going to do some pesticide safety training, because you're going to have to, because you're going to have a fill person. You're also going to have a person who's on a computer somewhere operating this equipment. They're going to have to be trained in case of emergency, and they have to go and work with that piece of equipment or drive that piece of equipment to get it out of a situation that it could be in. But what you guys have been talking about with the technology of being able to have cameras and see, and we're talking about weed spray right now, direct shooting just individual weeds and then continuing down the road and not spraying. So now you're using less chemical. There's less pollution going in the air, and just you go down the line. And we all work in this industry, so we all have an understanding of that. I still am trying to find a con. I struggle to find anything that is not a pro for potentially moving forward with this. And I understand the labor side of it, but you just heard the statistic. We only have 50% of the tractor drivers we need in our industry anyway.
And Greg, you mentioned three people basically running 2 sprayers and a mixer and a loader, right? You get rid of the guys that are driving the tractors, you've reduced your liability twice right there. Your potential liability, right? You don't have those guys that can have a hose break that's behind them, they get drenched in chemical. Your liability is reduced exponentially.
The PPE, help me understand it. That's like a full chemical suit, right?
Personal protective equipment, yes.
Do they work as efficiently when they're wearing this gear? They have to wear gloves too, right? So you're trying to do work.
Mandatory gloves and eyeglasses.
It depends on the product, though.
Depends on the product. Not necessarily
But
completely.
gloves and eyeglasses are mandatory in the state, no matter what.
Okay. And so when you put on all this gear, then you're potentially then you run into the heat issue. When it's hot out, you can't
There you
be
go.
wearing these suits, right?
Yeah.
So how do you address that?
We work at night.
Okay.
But that doesn't work for everybody. I mean,
Yeah.
you can't go down to Coachella Valley and always work at night.
But then you run into lighting, right? There's requirements for working at night, right? So,
Thankfully, tractors supply enough light for that.
but you have to measure.
But if
that,
you have
right?
your fill station, then you have to make sure there's enough light around that fill station for that as well.
Greg, I'd like your comment on the reducing the exposure to the company. What is it, like a death? That's a worst case scenario, right? No one would ever want to see that in their company. What would a death cost a company?
Well, I can speak to an experience in 2012 that happened to us. And what does it cost your company? I mean, number one, the emotional side and damage that it does to us as a family, and when I say a family, our employees are extensions of our families, and with the emotional damage that was created. I mean, that was a terrible day. Mike was there, he remembers. It was an awful, awful, awful day. And let alone Cal-OSHA showing up and, you know, you're getting your fines. I mean, none of that, I mean, at the end of the day, none of that actually matters. The fines for that type of thing, you know, in the grand scheme of things are minimal in comparison to what all of a sudden happens to your workman's comp rates. You know, so workman's comp rates over a very short period of time, due to that death in our experience mod, doubled in roughly 3 years. You know, and it wasn't that we didn't have a good safety program in place. You know, we'd been in business for 40 years at that point in time and had never had a death ever. And it happened, and it was an accident. It was an accident. It happens, unfortunately. And that was the first. You know, you get on the phone with your attorney, and the first thing the attorney says to you, "Do you know somebody dies at work every single day in the United States of America?" Yeah, but not us. You know, so you know that's the part of it. But yeah, the financial that financial side of it. I mean, that, you know, when your workman comp rate doubles, you know, that changes things. Now all of a sudden, we as a company are not as competitive as a vineyard management company because it costs us more to have employees than it does our competitor. And you know, it could potentially harm that company. And you know, and I know deaths that put companies out of business.
I have two thoughts on that too, if I could. One, I agree absolutely, it's like the worst situation possible, and I'll speak to that in just a second. But the other part too is, if you are an FLC, you do have conditions for licensure that you have to meet, and potentially a serious violation of an OSHA law may exclude them from meeting the qualifications for licensure. So for an FLC, depending on a whole bunch of different things, how many violations you've had in the past and that kind of thing, it could potentially remove your FLC license, meaning you're out of business. So it's at a licensing standard, regulatory standard, it's awful, it's terrible. On a human perspective, I have a colleague that I worked with almost 20 years ago, and he was a grower down in the Salaki Valley. And he was making a bit of a career change, so his adult son was taking over the farm and running things while he was doing something else. And he and I were working together one day, and he got a call, you know, and it was the worst news possible, that his son was killed in a rollover tractor accident, and he had drowned in a drainage ditch. I mean, I saw his face, it was devastating. I mean, I've never seen a man scream and cry and just not be able to contain himself, because it was his son, for God's sake. I mean, he loved this kid. This was, you know, his whole farm's future. And I can guarantee you, he made every effort possible to keep his workplace safe. He did. And to Craig's point, it happens. It happens. And I know for a fact, if he could have taken his son off that tractor and replaced it with a laptop, he would have done it in a heartbeat, and his son would still be alive today.
So, one of the purposes of this panel is to deliberate goals and strategies on how to advance autonomous technology in agriculture. So to each of you, I would ask, you had to pick just one aspect to focus on to advance autonomy.
Sorry, start over.
You guys all right?
We
Need
were having a
five?
conversation real quick.
I apologize.
You good?
He
All right.
knows the guy.
Hey, I don't want to blow by. That's tragic, and this is what we're here to try and get around. One of the purposes of this panel is to deliberate goals and strategies on how to advance autonomous equipment in agriculture. Each of you, if you could pick just one aspect to focus on, what would it be and why?
I think it has to be education first and foremost. I think the regulators need help understanding the technology, but also providing opportunities for the workforce to engage with it. I just saw that Western Growers had a $750,000 grant just for that. And that's kind of the missing piece that a lot of our companies like ourselves have, is finding the way that we can train people quick enough to fill the positions. So if there's other opportunities like these grants to work with community colleges to increase the level of education available, that's number one for me.
And so, I mean, we've been talking about it. For me, it's the safety aspect of it. There's just so much there that, you mentioned it. We are the number 2 deadliest workplace issues of any industry out there behind mining. And we all know mining by far is the worst, you know? And they've gone autonomous. They're going autonomous, and guess what? They're cleaning it up. So for that's the number one thing. That is the number one thing for me. That's the number one thing for my family. We want to stay in California. I can't roll my vineyards up and go to another state. This is what we do. This is what my family's done. We farm. You know, I'm a 4th generation California farmer. I'm 3rd in this business. But the things that are happening, I don't know that there's a 4th generation in this particular business coming behind me, because it's myself and my sister and my 2 cousins that operate our family's business today. And of that, there is 8 children. And then I have another cousin who's not part of the business that has 4 children. So there's 12 children that potentially would want to come and work for our family's business, and not one of their parents, and I'm included in that, wants my child to do it. That's sad. So if we can clean up the safety side of it, and we have an opportunity to provide a safe work environment that everyone can go to, and we actually have jobs for people to do, we would want to stay here and do this. But I'm not holding my breath that the state of California is going to allow us to have these things come into place that are really necessary for us to do. I'm confident we'll get autonomous tractors through the regulators and we'll be able to use them. Then all the other things that we heard about in the room next door a little while ago will, cause those issues to all the heartache for us to make that decision. But this is the biggest one we got to get through right now.
And I want to piggyback on something that Adam said. As far as education, it's a 2-part thing. One is, I think you have to educate the regulators. You got to talk to them about the technology, what's there. But we also really have to educate the workforce. We have to talk with our employees, explain to them how does it work? How does this tractor work? What are the safety parameters around it? Why does it make your job easier? Why does it make your job safer? Why is it advantageous to you to learn this new skill that can help you work with upward mobility within the company, upward mobility within the agriculture industry, gives you transferable skill to other industries if you want. Because when you're talking to the regulators, it's a 2-part conversation. There's a public policy, like what is the right thing to do in making a regulation that serves the people. But the other part of it is the politics of it. And how do we deal with the labor unions who are going to have their concerns? And how do we make sure that they understand and that they're getting the pressure from the people that they represent in knowing that this is what they need and what they want as well. So I'd say education is multi-tiered like that.
So you mentioned the state of California and some of the issues you have to deal with. But the state has allocated funds to promote agricultural technology to address, number one, increase food production and farm productivity, 2, upscale labor, and 3, improve safety. So there's big opportunity for ag tech in this industry. So Craig, as a grower, where do you think those funds could be focused and add up? What is at stake without changes to Title 8 for California?
Well, I think number one, we need to go back, we'll go back and touch on the education side of it again. Those funds should be available and appropriated out there too. I don't wanna just say education sector, because the state school system here, which they could do research, their research is way more costly and never, I don't wanna say never, a lot harder to finalize than working with private companies. Private companies typically are coming in with a lot of dollars already, and if they can tie those dollars to grants that are available out there, the better use of the money will happen. So I think, it goes back to education. The state regulators or the people who are in charge of these funds need to understand that they need to work with private businesses that are actually interested in moving forward with it, tying them with tech companies ag tech companies that are interested in this as well. I mean, I'm here because we're working with Blue White. That's plain and simple. That's why I'm sitting here. We had been talking about autonomous tractors. We knew autonomous tractors in some cases are being used out there in vineyards and in orchards. And with the amount of H2A guest workers that we are having to bring in to operate tractors, this is where the conversation went. So, it's gotta be, there is a spot for, the UC Davises and the Cal Polys and the Fresno States of the world to be a part of this, but they need to be working with companies that are already here, that have the technology already and have the understanding and have the backing for it.
So what's at stake? I would start with talking about the opportunities that are currently available that could go away or not be executed properly. So I mentioned $60 million that has been allocated for a smart ag tech hub in the Central Valley. So that's funding that was half from CDFA, which is California State, and half from federal funding through Build Back Better. That's money that will be used on ag tech, but if Title 8 doesn't change, you're going to be missing kind of the biggest part and the crown jewel of what can happen, because autonomy in Title 8 touches every single step in the process of growing something, from planting it to harvesting it. Ag tech and autonomous ag equipment can play a role there, and if you're not going to be addressing it, we're going to be missing all of that value. So that's one opportunity that can be missed. So that whole program of community colleges and the Smart Ag Hub really will be serving kind of half of its purpose otherwise, and then that's going to be really sad. And all of the careers that can go into that, and the training of the people that can go into that, that would be a horrible shame that they wouldn't be able to actually commercialize the technology they went to school to learn. So that's one piece. And then also, there's about 200 companies that came to Fresno for a FIRA conference, which is a Forum of International Robotics and Agriculture, to specifically show off their autonomous ag equipment. 200 companies that, if they were like ours, we hired 60 people in the first year we were here. So bet some back of the napkin math here. We've got around 1,200 jobs that you could have in 1 year come to California for the purpose of agriculture technology. And these are good jobs that pay better than typically a tractor driver would earn. Once again, transferable skills, upward mobility. To me, that's a big shame if we would miss those jobs and all that investment. We're talking about $60 billion in ag tech that went just into startup companies over the past 2 years. That's a lot of incentive to bring those companies to California and have them spend that money on R&D here. So that's what I see as opportunities and what can be missed.
One other location I could see the money being dispersed to that would be beneficial, and and you mentioned it, not everyone wants to go to a four-year school, and I agree with that 100%. Not everyone needs to go to a four-year school, or should they go to a four-year school. Some people like to work. This can be deployed at high school levels. You heard Amy in the other room talking about what her husband does. He teaches. He teaches in high school, and he's still teaching kids how to work on combustion engines. Okay, well, what if we had an ag tech? Especially in these areas where agriculture is the dominant money driver in that community. Why can't that money be deployed into high schools and to community colleges for trade? I mean, it's very simple. And again, if you're deploying it into local communities and at high schools and community colleges, guess what you get buy-in from? You get buy-in from your privately held farming operations who want to participate because they know there's a potential there for an employee to come and work for them if they work with them. So.
And I think there's a model for that does exist. We don't have to reinvent the wheel.
No.
Many other states are doing this. Like in New York, there's the type of private-public partnerships that happen between schools, technology companies, and government to incentivize the companies to come there. And it works. They're constantly bringing companies from outside the U.S. even to come and set up there. We can be doing that too here.
So we talked about jobs, technology, and money. So losing jobs to technology has always been a concern. Before now, cash registers, whatever. Alternately, the World Economic Forum estimates that by 2025, technology will create at least 12 million more jobs than it destroys. So we've touched around this a little bit, but what do you feel the consequences are if California does not update its regulations regarding investment and employment in autonomy?
Number one, ag will fail to exist in the most wonderful place for agriculture in the entire world. No other place has the soil and the weather and the abilities that we have right here in California. And I might be wrong in this statistic. I know it used to be, I can't remember exactly how many specialty crops there are in the United States of America. It's around 300. And all but, it's more than that, yeah, almost 400 now. And like all but 2 of those are grown right here in California. Okay, so I mean, if that doesn't tell you anything, I know the program crops are still what everyone wants to talk about in the United States of America when it comes to the Farm Bill and things like that. And I know those things are important to feeding the world, but when you talk about, so you have those 5 program crops, and then you have 400 roughly specialty crops, and all but 2 of them are grown right here in California. What a shame if we don't have technology to be able to help bring us into the next 30, next 10, 15, 20, 25 years and beyond.
I can piggyback on that a little bit. I absolutely agree with everything you just said. And I'm going to have 2 thoughts on this. The first part is failure is not an option. Paul 13, we cannot leave this regulation as is. We have to, we must, we will fix it. It's just going to take a little bit of time. It's going to take longer than I want because the regulatory process is what it is. But we are getting there. And to your optimistic point at the beginning, failure is not an option. Because if we keep this regulation as it is in California, to Craig's point, it's already so incredibly costly in California to grow a crop. We are the most regulated state in the world, place in the world to grow anything, and we're competing with other countries and states that don't have those costs. Wine grapes, for example, if you look at Oregon, Washington, and every other country in the world where they make wine, we're the only place that doesn't have a government investment in the production of wine and growing wine grapes and the research needed to do that. We're the only place, and we have the highest cost. And we have to comply with other standards as far as labeling and everything else. So that combined with, how do I say it? If you look at the environment of California, and Roger talked about it in another presentation, Roger Eisen, about climate change is responsible for everything that's wrong in the world today. Climate change in California is going to be about water in a big, big way. And we are facing a water crisis in the very near future. If the drought projections of the climatologists are correct, and we have to really look at the science closely, we can no longer rely on the snow cap. It's just not going to be there the way it has been historically over time. So we have to really make a switch to groundwater reliance, right? And every grower knows that when you're in normal seasons, you rely 60% on surface water, 40% on groundwater. In a drought, it's flipped over. If you make that change permanently because of drought, you are going to run out of water unless we, in a big way, recharge the groundwater all over California. If you're looking at long term, where everybody's looking at demanding water, I'm talking about urban, suburban, industry, the environment. We're competing with all them. The first of the chopping block is going to be agriculture. So all of that combined, the regulatory environment, water availability, this regulation, we will not survive in agriculture unless we address these issues. So I go back to what I said, failure is not an option.
So I think I've gone on quite a bit on economic development. So I think I'll pass my turn on this one and we can jump to the next.
All right, so,
I think we should open it up for questions.
Sure.
We only have a few minutes left, so.
So we've heard about the autonomous tractors being used in like vineyards and orchards. Has anybody seen them being used in strawberry farming yet? And what they've been used for, if they have?
So I know of a couple companies that are doing trials for autonomous harvesting. It's not exactly a tractor, but it would fall under this regulation because it's important to mention that Title 8 refers to autonomous self-propelled ag equipment. And that's where I was trying to illustrate that every single step of the way of planting, spraying, harvesting, all of it gets touched by this.
I know one example where I think Auburn University had some sort of autonomous vehicle that was used for ultraviolet light treatment for like drip treatment and a few other some sort of mildew. There was a couple, 2 or 3 things that they were utilizing it for, and it's a small example, but we're starting to try to use it in one areas.
I believe autonomous tractors are not.
It's a smaller.
No, I believe autonomous tractors can be used in other states.
Yeah.
I mean, just in California.
oh, sure.
So where do those statistics come from in the mining industry? Are those domestic statistics?
No.
No.
The only mining being done in North America is being done in the oil tar sands. There's none in the States.
So all those accrued safety hours were outside of the United States?
Chile, Australia primarily, South America and Australia primarily. The oil sands have a bunch. Since they've allowed it up there, there's a pile. Some of that's underground as well. So to wrap things up and bring it up right here at the very end. So with the upcoming meeting in March with Cal-OSHA, what's the takeaway here? Is there a call to action for the industry and for farmers regarding Title 8?
So yeah, so a couple of things. One is at the March hearing of the Occupational Safety and Health Standards Board, we're going to hear a panel discussion
In LA.
in LA. The interesting thing is they're doing it in Los Angeles. They're not doing it in ag country. So it's just how it happened to fall on their calendar. But that said, there is an opportunity for public comment through their WebEx, their Zoom system. And it's actually very easy to participate. And I'm going to share it with Teresa. She can send it out to AgSafe members and get you all the information. If you're a CAWG member, Winery Growers Association, we're going to send that out as well. We're waiting for it a little bit because we don't have the published agenda item just yet. They're probably not going to release that for another 2 weeks. So as soon as that comes out, we're going to do a big reach out to every grower in California, urging you to call in to that public comment period and talk about the need for changing this regulation and the need for this equipment and how the phrase that I use and have several growers have used, it is the future of farming. It's the future of farming, and we need to make this change.
Who's going to be at this March meeting?
So it's a public meeting.
It's a public meeting, okay.
Yeah.
And I know manufacturers are going to be there, growers are going to be there. I'm sure labor unions are going to be there. I'm in conversations with them. And I want to be clear, they're not bad people. They have a job to do. We all have a job to do. But we are just on very different sides on this issue. disagree that what they're representing is in the best interest of their members. So-
But I think we need to make a point of saying, if they really want to keep workers safe, then we align completely.
Absolutely.
Then we completely
Absolutely.
align.
Yeah.
We want to
100%.
keep workers safe, and hopefully, if there's anybody that has any doubt that this equipment is intended to make your life safer, make your lives better, and if you think it's going to take your job, please come and talk to us, because there isn't any data that supports that in any way whatsoever.
Well, given that statement, all those numbers that you spoke of the miles, million miles, trillion
Yes.
miles, is there any statistic on equal number of miles in labor, how much people were displaced, or that you could present? Because I think that's what you're speaking to. Or weren't displaced, maybe it created more jobs. But
So
that you didn't-
I know that in Australia, a lot of the mines specifically signed contracts that said, just so.
Yeah, but you threw a lot of numbers up, but you didn't equate it.
I didn't come across anything that demonstrated that
hours.
one way or the other. No.
Because, and this is the last question I have, because the military drawdown has been impacted. Part of that was driven by autonomy. They recently refueled a couple jets with automated systems. So there's pilots that now they don't need anymore. Their numbers have been cut and their autonomous equipment has gone up, so they have a reduction in need for workers. And that's where just my question is, we're not unlike that because our workforce is drawn from those same, that's our.
But
Maybe in that specific job description, but then the jobs move into the development of those technologies.
Yeah, I understand.
So-
Yeah.
And also, don't forget the one big statistic that Adam had earlier is that we have twice as many tractor jobs as we have tractor workers.
Positions, right.
So when you create the autonomous tractor in that particular workplace, you're not losing a job. You're just not, because there aren't enough people to do the work already.
And maybe a note about the military side of things, or the military adoption eventually to train pilots. Maybe 1% of the people can do it, and it takes 5 years. To train a UAV operator, 10% of the population can do it, and it takes 3 months. Okay, so this is why Adam said the purpose of the technology is to simplify things. Instead of being a software engineer, you can be a trained farm operator, and then you have this access.
So I mentioned See and Spray technology, right? So is how that technology works is spectral cameras, multispectral cameras are videoing and looking at those plants, and they can tell.
We have that.
Okay, so you've got that.
Yeah.
So those machines should be collecting data that whole time, telling you the condition of your field. Well, that's a pile of data that's got to be deciphered and disseminated, right? So instead of just somebody driving through the field in a tractor, now you've got people that need to analyze that data, plan operations, look at the overall health of the vineyard, whatever your crop may be. In order to go through all that data, you need people to do that. So you move them from a tractor, you move them up into a data analyst type position. So.
That's the selling point. All that. I'm totally buy into that. I did a paper in college about safety and reducing injuries by creating less interface with hazardous equipment, which this is. But I never touched on too much on the social impact either. And I see that now working with all these people in the field. It's okay, we bring in 3 tractors, that's 3 people or whatever supporting them. And you're right, equipment is damaged.
You're in a unique situation with who you work for. I know who you work for.
Yeah.
And your abilities to find and recruit and keep employees are at a much higher level than 99% of the industry. Because of what the owner of your company does and how much he gives back and creates for his particular employees. You're in a unique situation. So I know Tony. I'm assuming you must work with Tony Shelton.
Yeah.
Okay, so Tony's on the board with me. So I appreciate your experience and that kind of thing, but it's unique. And even myself, I'm in a different unique situation because we're a large wine grape grower and we have access to housing that we built back in the 90s. Best decision my dad and my uncle probably ever made without any understanding of how it was going to help us in the future. We have housing for almost 200 people in Sonoma County. we have housing for 75 to 80 people in the Clarksburg, Lodi area. And that's the only reason at this point in time, we are not busted at the seams trying to figure out how we're gonna get the job done. Because we're able to bring in H2A employees at a cost that we can afford. That's the difference. So I mean, I think, where you're gonna see this stuff work, it's gonna work even better for the smaller grower. It's gonna work better for them than it is for the larger grower. I mean, it equals its way out, but it's gonna keep the smaller grower from selling to a larger grower. Yep, it'll help them with scale, yep. Because they struggle to find employees more than we with the large companies do.
One thing I just want to say is what really gives me hope about this effort is the level of cooperation I've seen between growers, organizations, companies, OEMs. Like we've got, I can count 5 or 6 different companies coordinating through the AEM that are technically competitors, but are working together to see this happen because they understand how important it is. And that level of cooperation, even with academics, kind of acting as the go-between with OSHA as well, it really gives me hope that this is going to change and positively. And whatever happens to happen, it's going to happen cooperatively. So anyone here that feels like this is important to you, please do make a public comment in March. It will make a difference.
That's kind of the linchpin to this coming through. The board has specifically mentioned there aren't growers and employees in this room saying, we want this technology, we need this technology. So please, those are the people that need to be making comments to the board.
You can make a difference.
Yeah, and
Got one question.
David Horn, oh, I'm sorry, please.
I just have a curious question, about, rural robotics. Do they fall in the same autonomous tractor?
Absolutely.
Sure.
It's not just tractors, it's any self-propelled agricultural equipment.
And are you linked to them?
We know them. I don't
But
work with them.
as a group, like you mentioned, the board members, do they work with you guys to pass any standards or regulations as a group?
I haven't spoken to them specifically as a company, but they certainly are welcome if they're interested in speaking on this topic.
To the best of my knowledge, they are not an AEM member. When Adam was speaking of that coalition that we have, I mean, I'm not promoting my company, but that's the beauty of where we got, was we bring these people together, everybody takes off their company hat, and it's all about industry and safety and working together. It's pretty special.
Them yet. But if you know somebody, I'll give you my card, have them reach out to me. I'll definitely plug them in.
Yes, same here.
Yeah.
We would love to have them
Absolutely.
be a part of the conversation.
That's another part of the support.
Of course.
Please. Yeah.
I mean, last year at this event, I came here with one intention and one intention only, and that is to start to try to bring agriculture together, to start working on this together, because it can't just be the orchard industry, it can't just be the vineyard industry, it can't just be the fresh produce industry. We all have to come together. And this is one thing I think we can all agree on. And that's the issue with our industry, is we're all so segmented in what we do that we can't always agree on everything, especially when it comes to water. You know, you got Northern California people who are not happy with what is happening in Southern California. So this is one thing that we as agriculture should all be able to speak with one unified voice. And if we do that, we will actually understand the power that we have in the state of California and how we could potentially start to change things going forward. And create a work environment in California that we can all continue to do this for a lifetime.
So we're 10 minutes over, so thank you. So I think that says a lot about the subject that people remain
So
interested.
next year, let's do this like on Wednesday, early in the morning.
We appreciate those that stayed to the last session for sure.
Thank you,
So
everybody.
thank you.
Thank you.